Hello, I'm Jenny Lamorgan with Lean Into Green, and I'm excited to be here today with my guest, Charlene Spretnak. I'm going to go into a little bit about who she is and why you want to listen to her and the impact she's going to have on your life. But before we get started, I want to share a little bit about our telesummit and for those of you listening for the first time. I'm a green entrepreneur and owner of greenwomanstore.com. And we're here to share more about going green and how it enriches our lives, our health, our wealth, and our happiness. And also to understand the wholeness of going green, politically, personally, spiritually, culturally, and the many impacts our green lifestyles have on the planet and on peace and on sustainability. We're here to deepen our relationship with the earth and how we understand and experience going green. And we're here to learn from some of the best experts in this field. It's a journey, it's a personal journey, and then it's a collective one. And you may want to invite family and friends to join us. Our experts will provide you with wealth of information, tips, tools for going green. I hope that you will join us on every single call. So, with us today is Charlene Spretnak. She helped to co-found the Green Party movement here in the United States with her 1980s book, Green Politics. She is an author and activist, and she has been named one of Britain's 100 eco-heroes of all time. Charlene writes on the subject of dynamic relatedness. She's written 8 books on this subject, and we're very happy to have her with us today as we talk about leaning into green as a lifestyle and all that that encompasses. Welcome, Charlene.
Thank you, Jenny.
As I've been doing these interviews, 2 examples of relational reality that have come to mind just through the last couple of interviews. One is organic farming. I spoke with Denise O'Brien from the Women, Food, and Agriculture Network. And she was talking about how women are farming so differently than the corporate soybean, corn conglomerates that are out there, that the women are actually farming 10, 20-acre plots out of the need to provide for their own communities and to be in relationship that way. And that was so interesting. And then also fair trade. It seems like that's where we're in relationship with the producers of our consumer goods.
Right.
Is that what you're talking about in your newest book, Relational Reality?
Well, it's interesting to start there. That's like throwing a big net way out from us, but it is very relevant because what I started noticing around 2004, at which time I'd kind of, I won't say lost hope, but in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, some people may remember there were a lot of books written about discoveries in physics and then complexity studies and chaos theory, and it was said that these discoveries of dynamic interrelatedness are going to ripple out into society and change all our institutions, and that never happened. So, except healthcare got a little bit more relational with the complementary healing methods. Anyway, I just thought, well, I'm not going to see this in my lifetime, okay, but I'm sure it's going to happen. And then around, as I say, 2004, I started noticing little articles in the newspaper, and they were usually in physiology. There's been a surprising discovery the researchers weren't looking for, that some aspect of the way the human body actually works is way more relational than they had ever imagined. And then I'd see another article like that, and then another discovery the next month. So I started collecting all those, and that became the book Relational Reality, this big relational shift that's happening now because of these recent discoveries. But you can also see it in every field, including the ones you mentioned, because we are in relationship with the people who grow our food. You know, we pay money down the pipeline, and to think we don't have a relationship is not making it go away. You know, you're either in relationship with an agribusiness conglomerate or a fair trade network, or maybe something in between. So I definitely think you're right to include this in this discussion of relational reality.
And it feels like we're coming into more knowingness, and it feels like a relational shift is a reality shift.
Well, I think the awareness, it's really happening now, as I say, because these discoveries of the last decade, unlike the earlier ones, which were more abstract, these are very physical, very accessible things about how our health, for instance, is affected by our interrelationships with other people, by relationships with natural forces we don't even pay attention to, air pressure, how much sunshine we're exposed to, all kinds of things. So I do see that relational shift moving through every field now. And in the book Relational Reality, I just picked 4 large areas to give examples in, but really it is happening everywhere. I think that's right.
And I think that's the good news, because it's
definitely, finally.
I know,
It's happening.
And it feels too like it seems like to me anyway that it's sustainable. These changes that are coming about. It's really making everything so much more whole. It's like we're getting the whole picture, where before we were getting bits and pieces. And I remember sitting at a discussion table one time in Geneva, and they were discussing some issue, and everybody had pieces, but nobody was getting the whole picture. And so it feels like we're coming more full circle here and coming to a sense of wholeness.
I agree.
So you talked a little bit about the health care and how that's changing with complementary medicine, and I've certainly heard about elders doing better and living longer if they're more social rather than isolating as they get older.
Yeah, we've heard some general things about that, but the discoveries that keep happening, and this story is still unfolding. I hope after listening to a little bit of this, people will recognize it now when they hear some discovery being announced in the media or in the newspaper, instead of just turning the page, because we don't usually see the connections, but now you'll say, oh, I see, that's another discovery of how relational reality actually is. And I'll give you just a few examples, but a few years ago they did a study of 900 elderly adults, and they found that those with fewer friendships and other social interactions experienced a more rapid decline in motor function, such as walking, gripping, and balancing. And that was not expected. They say, well, it might affect your mood if you have friends or not. But no, it's affecting the tissues, the systems in your body. We are so inherently relational, and this was missed for 300 years of modern medicine. A doctor would say, whether you have friends or not, are you trying to tell me it would affect your readings on these, tests we're going to do? Well, as a matter of fact, yes.
Wow.
So another one was there was a study where they found that for people of all ages, 10 minutes of talking with someone, either in person or even on the phone, boosts mental performance and memory on a test, as much as doing a crossword puzzle right before the test boosts your score. It was the same effect. So talking to people made us a little smarter. And it was found that the more social contact people have, the higher their level of mental functioning. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
How to lift your IQ. We should have like social rooms before the testing rooms.
Yeah. Well, if you mention IQ, that's very interesting because there are all kinds of social factors in how one's IQ takes shape. I mean, it's intelligence that's measured on a standardized test, so of course there are qualifications. But breastfeeding is one. Breastfeeding has a very good effect on brain development. And the mechanistic way of explaining that was, there's some neurosugars in the breast milk, and that's good for brain development. But that's not the only thing. There's so much information exchanged between the mother and the infant during those long periods of breastfeeding with touch and the eye contact and all kinds of ways just information is exchanged. So that's one of the factors they found. And then another one was how many words a child hears spoken to him or her in infancy and toddlerhood. And the more words, the better they do in school later. So it had to be hearing words, sentences, a lot of language from someone the child was in relationship with, either a parent or a caregiver. Just plopping the child in front of television or computer screen and hearing language did not have a beneficial effect, and it even had a detrimental effect. So the key is they're hearing the patterns, the rhythm of language from someone they're in relationship with. And this apparently is really doing a lot of good things for their synaptic development. And then, well, just one more on IQ. They have thought that birth order influenced IQ just a little bit. They, about 20 years ago, found that the eldest child in a family usually scores about 3 points higher on the IQ test than the other siblings. But a really interesting study in Norway with the Army records showed that they give an IQ test to all the 19-year-olds when they have to go in and do their 2-year service. And so they also had the family histories that the young men had filled out on their forms. And so when they took the IQ scores and correlated it with the family history, they saw that extra 3 points for the eldest child that had been discovered in America as well. But then they noticed that if the eldest child had died and the second born had been raised as the eldest, that boy scored the higher points. And if the first two children had died and the third born had been raised as the eldest, that boy scored the extra points. So that is very interesting because they always say, the mechanistic biomechanical system, your brain is this, meat you're born with, it's your given. But in fact, all kinds of family relationships can have an effect on your brain power. And they didn't make any guesses as to why the eldest child or person being raised as the eldest child would have this effect. But, sometimes the parents have to go out and they tell the eldest child, well, watch over the younger ones. They kind of put them in an adult role. And sometimes the eldest children identify more with the adult world, like test taking. So it could be effects like that. But the point is, we are in play all the time relationally. We are not born with a fixed immune system, a fixed mental system. We are constantly interacting with other entities around us. And I think that is very hopeful because it never stops. We're always in play.
And not different from the earth. It's alive, it's interacting with everything in connection, and not to think of our own bodies as being any different.
And we have to be also literally in as much contact with nature as we can manage in the modern world, because they have found, for instance, that not even being in nature, but even seeing pictures of nature. Well, I'll give you two examples. One, it helps our healing a lot. There's so many studies that it helps healing that hospitals have now changed their decor. If you've been in a hospital recently, you've probably seen murals of mountain scenes. Yes. They're often in the patient's room now, and the curtains have leaf patterns and things, all kinds of nature motifs, and sometimes they have those little running water fountains on the desks out in the hallway. This is because of all the research that even looking at a picture of nature helps our healing. And there was also a series of 4 studies done where they showed 2 different groups of people slides. The first one, they showed them slides of human-made structures and constructions, and then they gave them a survey and to rank their values. And those people, right after the slideshow, ranked their values as, money, power, status, And then the other group, they showed them slides only of nature scenes. And after the nature photography, they gave them the same survey and said, would you rank your values? And that group ranked connectedness, community, friendship, family as their highest values. So it's very interesting. You know, connecting with nature seems to free us of our self-absorption and the modern tendency to just be cut off from other people and lacking in empathy. It seems to allow us to move into being our true, expansive, empathic selves.
That's amazing. That's amazing at the difference. Well, it certainly sounds like it's affecting our health and our healthcare system as well. Is relational reality affecting our sense of wealth or our financial systems in any way?
Well, I have a whole chapter actually on the economy and ways that this kind of relational thinking is being brought to bear, because it's pretty clear that things are not working well now except for, you know, a few people who own most of the corporations. So all kinds of grassroots activity is starting up, and I think a lot of it didn't come out of theory. It was very interesting to me to see this happen. I think it came out of the farmers market movement, because I used to give talks back in the 80s for the Green Party about community-based economics. That's always been our economic platform around the world, so that you're circulating money mostly within the town, the region, and the adjacent regions, instead of every time you buy a product, it would be going out to a distant corporate headquarters somewhere. So, you know, the idea of buying locally and regionally and building up real economic security. And people would be very interested in it, but they would say, well, is this working anywhere? And I could only give very partial examples in different places. But then when the farmers market really took off, people started getting what community-based economics would be, what it would mean for our community, to have a secure food system with a green belt of farms around, bringing us fresh food into the farmers markets once or twice a week. And at the farmers markets, people started selling other kinds of things. They're almost like the old market days that they had in Europe for hundreds of years. So the social fabric is starting to be repaired and woven anew with all kinds of connections. And this is a new understanding of what economic security really is. It's not trying to just offer all the tax breaks to get a big corporate factory in, which could pull out, you know, anytime they want. It's having this secure economic network in your region. And, you know, you could do some long-distance trade. There's nothing evil about long-distance trade, but it shouldn't be the keystone of what's holding up the economy. You know, just export what you can afford to lose, because you don't want to be dependent on storms in distant areas and upheavals. And instead, with all the trade agreements now, we have this model where you're supposed to get sucked into a long-distance export model. And I think a lot of people are seeing that that's not a smart relationship. And this other community-based way to build up the economy is just a much wiser way to go.
It's like we're starting to think small again. You know, we've swung way to one side of being so huge and corporate, and now we're coming back to being more to being smaller. And small is sustainable. That's the piece there. So relational reality feels to me like, or relational reality feels to me like it is reality. You know, this is the truth. You know, this is how things really work, but we've been blinded to it or not aware of it in some way. And so then to connect to reality that feels true and real feels like happiness, like a big load's been taken off.
That's a good way to put it. Yes, it is.
You know, that unreality, that sense of unreality that we're trying to walk through and push through.
Right.
If that's gone, then the walking is a lot easier.
And it's as if we're getting to know our true nature for the first time in hundreds of years, because the culture just got built up around this other idea, this mechanistic model, a biomechanical model of how the body works. If there's a part, just take it out, put a new part in, and you have these different systems that don't really have anything to do with one another. And it was just this whole mechanistic projection that didn't have anything to do with what was really going on. And so it is freeing and profoundly corrective and wholesome that we're finally getting our systems of knowledge in sync with the way the physical world really works, including the human body.
And we need science to be able to document this so that they can come along with us.
That's what's really making the difference. These discoveries are coming out of science, and they were unexpected, but now there's just a big wave of them.
Huh. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for collecting them all and putting them in a book so we can actually get our hand around it, you know, wrap our brain around it. Mm-hmm. So it seems that gratitude is an example of relational practice, and it's certainly taught in spiritual practices and elsewhere. Can you talk about gratitude as a relational practice?
Mm-hmm. It's one of the ways they help children build up a sense of resilience so they can catch their balance when negative things happen, perturbations. And it's also used to teach children in elementary school and middle school what's called happiness habits, because they found through a lot of studies that children learn better when they're happy. If they're unhappy, that's a distraction, always pulling the mind away. So in order to develop these happiness habits, they suggest that they start every day by thinking about something that they're grateful for, something in their life that they have a deep appreciation for. And then they repeat that practice at lunch, something in my life I'm really, appreciative about. And they end the day then by thinking about something that happened that day that they appreciate. And then two other happiness patterns are the habit of thoughtfulness. They try to just do something for someone every day, and the habit of optimism, which is curbing any negative self-talk in their minds and focusing on possibilities. So, gratitude sort of shifts what the psychologists call the set point in their mind, because at least in those 3 times a day and often throughout the day, because we build mental habits, they realize I am centered, I'm fortunate, and I have these relationships. So for all socioeconomic levels, this is very important for the child to feel that they're in these supportive relationships that they can cultivate if they're not lucky enough to have them in their household, or they work on how to build these kind of relations up in your life. And another interesting study I just saw recently was they found that the children who were most resilient when problems popped up in their lives were the ones who had a sense of family history, which I thought was very interesting. It means they feel connected. They feel in relationship with the family story going back and the family around them who are the unfolding actors in the next part of the story, including the child. So I think children need to feel grounded in that family story and grounded in nature. And those are their 2 secure points with which they can engage, from which they can engage with the world.
That's wonderful. We know the power of telling our story and how healing that can be. And now to hear the other side of it, how healing it can be for the child to be hearing the stories, the family stories being told.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Indigenous cultures do that all the time. That with especially keeping the oral traditions alive, that's how the culture was built.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of that, this all feels like very old science. Is it really new, or is it very old science, or is it a more ancient sense of relatedness as reality?
Well, it is, and the indigenous cultures all around the world, of course, perceive this dynamic interrelatedness as being the core of what was going on. That's why they have the opposite orientation generally. You can't make universal claims, but it's hard to find an indigenous culture that had the same idea of the modern focus on the individual. The way we look at society, well, you've got individuals and they're in families and, they have these connections and they live somewhere. But the way an indigenous culture looks at it, there's the cosmos, the night stars, the planets, the whole drama of the seasons, and there's Earth, and there's our continent, and there's our land, and there's the people, everyone in the native culture, and inside that are clans, and embedded inside that are families, and embedded inside that is the individual. So it's very, very relational and true. The idea that we're just out there floating around as a lone cowboy is just a projection of the mechanistic worldview that the West, what can I say, detoured with for a few hundred years, or more than that, really. But yes, it is absolutely ancient, and this orientation is seen everywhere in indigenous cultures.
And a lot of this new science is about humans coming into relation with nature again, rather than being separate from nature, which is
right.
how we've falsely been seen. How can we separate from nature? But that's the way life and living on this planet has been interpreted,
right.
most recently.
Nature's just a backdrop for the autonomous individual in the West. And now they see, no, nature's keeping you alive. Nature's determining if you're healthy or sick. Nature's not just a backdrop for human projects.
Right. It's that wholeness that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us around to spirituality. In the 1980s, you wrote about spirituality in the Green Movement and in the feminist movements. Mm-hmm. Can you speak to green spirituality today and where we are with that, and what we're calling quite multiculturally, we're referring now to ecofeminism?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are two different areas. There's a lot of overlap, but there are ecofeminists who are interested in the historic fact that women and nature have been linked culturally throughout history, and which was either good or bad for women. If you were in a culture that honored nature, it was good that women were associated with nature. If you were in a culture that just had no use for nature, of course, it was bad to be associated with nature. But not all of those people interested in exploring that connection were interested in the spiritual dimension. I see the spiritual dimension of the Green Movement, or this effort over 40-some years to ecologize our thinking in all areas and bring us back in contact with this relational reality, as having gone through a lot of ups and downs. If you were making a chart of it over since the first Earth Day, 1970, up till now, you'd see a big rush after the first Earth Day of all kinds of religions and spiritual orientations, talking about, writing about, having conferences about our relationship and our moral responsibilities to the Earth community. And then you see it kind of ebb in the late 70s, and of course there's a big backlash against green thinking in the 80s after President Reagan and his Mr. Watt get in there. So then it goes up and down like that through the 90s, and around 2000 there's quite a lot of spiritual activity, and then that falls off. But I think now with climate change, the fact that we are so far into this crisis of global climate disruption has really awakened people to the immediacy of connecting with nature and the deeper questions of, what is our role on Earth? As the great green economist Herman Daly used to say, we may not know what our purpose is on Earth, but surely it's not to treat the Earth as if it were a business in liquidation.
Yeah.
Running all the natural resources into the toxic waste dump as soon as possible through our business system. So it feels to me like it's picking up speed again. The whole idea of linking the deeper questions about, what is the relationship of humans with the rest of the Earth community, and what kind of moral responsibility do we have being in the position that we're in of having degraded so much of the natural systems.
And that way of living doesn't seem to make sense to the younger people. They're wanting to work for green businesses. They're bringing solutions that our generation couldn't even have conceived of. In the 70s, 80s, I couldn't conceive of corporations going green. It just didn't seem possible. I didn't know how we were going to turn this thing around, But with consumer pressure and organizing, it is turning around remarkably.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a race against time because we've ignored what we were actually doing to the physicality of the planet, and that's been tragic, that people were able to always just keep sweeping it off the table, off the discussion table. Everything, there'll be a technological fix. We know what we're doing, da-da-da. Right. But I think, as you say, the younger people look at this and say, no, we're not going to postpone this. Let's just jump in and do things differently.
And it's happening globally. The young people are standing up and speaking and inventing and
they are inventing, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because they don't. All the polls show they, in large numbers, are not interested in organized religion, but they're quite interested in the spiritual dimension of life and exploring that and cultivating their spiritual life. So I think all kinds of new forms might come out of this.
Mm. All right. Charlene, one thing I really appreciate about you is that you've always been an activist, and that's a lot of years of activism. Can you speak to the importance of activism as we see peoples rising around the world and in the U.S.? Voices to protect the environment continue to grow and evolve. And the latest growth or really powerful change that I've seen is Native women taking leadership now, with a lot of the land and water protection, which, of course, uses those treaty rights that have been violated for ever, that now can protect the water and the land for all of us. And so this activism that's rising within our country and around the world, can you just speak to the importance of activism?
Mm-hmm. Well, I saw a long time ago some studies showing that the grassroots activism is usually driven by women around their kitchen tables at the local level. And when it gets higher up the chain, so there's money or public status involved, then you see a gender change, and the top of the organizations are usually not the women. But that in itself is changing. And I'm so happy to see the kind of things you've just named, those examples. But, you know, we can't get to where we need to be unless we undo the corruption on every vote in our state legislatures and the House of Representatives in Washington and the U.S. Senate and the executive office, and that is the lack of campaign finance reform. As long as every elected official, no matter how good they are when they start out, has to please the big money interests in order to get those campaign donations all the time, every week, every month. The party gives them a number. They have to raise a financial amount every month. And then when they vote, they have to please those people. So until that's addressed, we can never get the laws and regulation we need to address what's happening to the Earth community physically and to people. So I just want to put that, you know, up there along with any other issue we can name. We have to get campaign finance reform, or we're just going to be stuck in these completely corrupt laws and decisions that are the opposite of what we really need.
It's true, and the money that is influencing campaigns now, we know, are influencing our educational institutions, and you know, it's that same intention, that same money that's leading us astray.
Yeah, I mean, in Washington, we know people who talk about, oh, the government, I hate the government making us do this stuff. And I was talking to a man who was saying that, and I said, you know, Washington cannot pass one single law that the corporations don't want to have happen. That's how much they're in control. The corporate money is so needed by every legislator. So, yeah, I can't talk about politics without putting that at the top of the list.
Well, and it's been said before on this telesummit, so thank you for putting it in there. So you are also doing a radio show every other Thursday. Mm-hmm. How do we connect with you on the radio show?
Mm-hmm. It's actually a weekly program. I brought in an old activist friend of mine to share it with me, and it's called All Together Now, and it's on the Progressive Radio Network, which is done over the Internet. So anyone can listen for free. They just go to the website, prn.fm. That's for Progressive Radio Network. So prn.fm, and then you click on our shows, and the very first one that comes up alphabetically is mine, All Together Now.
All Together Now.
And so it's every Thursday, 3 to 4 Eastern Time in the afternoon, which is noon to 1 Pacific Time. And either I will be hosting and interviewing someone, or my co-host, Eleanor LeCain, who's in Washington, D.C., will be doing it on the weeks in between mine.
Very nice, very nice. So that's
people can listen to all. I've had wonderful women on, so their archival tapes are on that site free to listen to as well.
Oh, that was my next question. Very good. All right. And do you talk also about relational reality and more on? It
really came out of that. You know, as I say, this is a story that's still breaking because these surprising discoveries are being made every month. And so I wanted to keep learning about it and have people on from different areas who could tell me what was happening in their particular area in terms of relational thinking, changing things.
Well, that sounds wonderful. In addition to your book, we've got the replays of your show. Because it's just so interesting and so inspiring, and, you know, it fills us with hope to hear the good news. You know, we
Mm-hmm.
get a lot of bad news, and this is good news. So, so we thank you very much, Charlene, for all that you've done in the past and for all that you'll continue to do, helping us to see relationships between all things here. To find out more about Charlene Spretnak, you can go to Charlene, Charlene, Spretnak, Spretnak.com. And we have links up here for her radio shows and for her Facebook page and where you can buy her book right off of her website. So, so thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Charlene.
Oh, Jenny, I've really enjoyed it. I'm so happy you're doing this lean into green.
It's fun. It's fun. It felt like we needed to just gather. You know, it just feels like a collective quest towards sustainability and to be able to wrap our hands around all of the pieces of it. It's beautiful. Thank you for participating.
My pleasure.
And we hope that all the listeners have been inspired and enriched by the good news and the good changes coming and the ones that are already here. So keep listening. Going green is a journey. We're glad you've come along. Thank you again, Charlene, author of Relational Reality. And thank you for joining us. Keep listening.